Hello, today we're going to be taking a look at the Ruko F11 GIM 2, and this is a drone that is supposedly fits in right around $350, so it puts it kind of in competition with DJI models of a similar price. So you're looking at something like a Mini or something along the lines of maybe a Spark, a DJI Spark price-wise. So without further ado, let's get a little bit of a get going, I guess. I'm just going to be very gentle. And there we go. So I previously have had like a SJRC F11, and that was very, very cheap, and I believe that was like a knockoff, albeit I did get it from like Wish or whatever, but albeit this is supposed to be a better drone. We'll see. So you get a Ziploc bag, similar carrying case. So it looks like a larger, higher quality carrying case. So it looks like you get the controller, of course, the battery, and the whole drone assembly, which looks almost on par with what we have. Okay. It looks like very similar to what we've looked at before on this channel. It looks very similar to. So the thing about this one, though, this is not the same one we've looked at, because this one everything is USB-C. So the controller, the batteries, all that is USB-C. So as you can see, you can pop off the batteries. They have that USB-C on them. I don't believe it comes with an SD card. On the bottom here, the controller. You have, of course, USB-C as well. Looks like the antennas actually do everything, so this looks pretty good. I'm going to plug this all in now, see if we can get this charging for flight at a different time. But yeah, no, I think that looks good. Let me get the battery out. So 2 batteries and the drone itself. Let's see what we have here. Look good. I'm gonna get these charging and see you in a sec. So we're gonna break this down into 2 parts. The first part, I want to talk a lot about the flight experience of flying this drone. Specifically just that the first time that I ended up trying to fly this, it spent like 10 minutes trying to acquire a GPS signal. I don't know if that's really maybe a GPS issue, maybe there was something going on. But then the next time I did it, I didn't have much of an issue. It was more like 3 or 4 minutes, typical for this kind of quality. I thought it was very odd that this drone took that long, or at least for the first time. So flight-wise, it is, I want to say, one of the lower, or least stable drones that I've flown, just because it's all over the place. It's kind of up and down. Here I'm doing a flight test. I'm actually probably about a mile away, and I still have pretty good quality, which I was actually pretty impressed by. A lot of times with these Wi-Fi drones, you can see them on the other side of this field. But a lot of times with these like lower quality drones, the Wi-Fi doesn't really reach that far, and I was very pleasantly surprised that it in fact did just fine. As you can see, I'm all the way like really far away flying behind some trees, and it's doing pretty good. So I was really surprised by just how far this distance is. Now the camera quality on this was kind of foggy. It also was very, I want to say low quality, but the camera just had a lot of issues, I noticed. It wasn't, and this is also upscaled to 4K, but for most of you guys that shouldn't be an issue. You guys are watching on your phones. But yeah, no, it looks, I mean, overall it stays pretty much where it's supposed to be. There is no optical float sensors, which, that was another big issue for me too, is that this drone is priced higher than a lot of drones with optical flow sensors. It's priced closer to the DJI Mini 2, which the video quality out of this is, I want to say, not anywhere close to the DJI Mini 2, and you have to register this drone to fly it. So it just becomes more of an issue, as you know, you're basically, it's hard to recommend this over a DJI Mini 2 when you're paying the same price for something that has lower camera quality, no optical flow, slightly lower flight time, and I'll start flying up here a little bit, fly high, but as you can see, I mean, it's wobbly, it's not as stable, the camera quality is definitely not as good. This was supposed to be like 4K or whatever, and you even get some of the blades in the gimbal, or in the frame of the gimbal, so it's just, it's a hard sell all around, and especially with just the issue of, camera quality not matching up to the competition. It's really a hard sell to make that statement. So another thing I would like to also talk about is just this obstacle tracking. So keep in mind, like with DJI and their other drones, this is usually done with, or like Optical, Skydio, any of these larger companies, they basically have like a computer that uses machine learning and basically determines and picks out where the person is and then follows them and kind of tries to keep the same size. The interesting thing with this though is that this is done via GPS on the controller, which means that there is some delay as it calculates, and so as you run along, it becomes more and more difficult to kind of keep up with that. Also, landing the sucker is a lot more difficult, just because it really, when you get under the trees and it's time to land, it becomes a problem where the drone is not as steady, especially when you start getting down. You have to do a lot of movement and course corrections, because when you start getting close to the ground, you lose a lot of that control. And then there's also some of that ground effect coming into play, and the drone starts behaving unpredictably as well. And so here was like a classic example of me just flying through the trees, and I was bobbing up and down. Basically it just feels like, since there's no obstacle sensors or really any sensors on the bottom to tell the drone how high it is, or to tell it position data when it's flying low, it just becomes very difficult to fly it like underneath the trees. So if you were looking at doing something like underneath the trees, I'd recommend probably taking a look at something different. It's really a hard sell to me compared to the DJI Mini 2, especially with most of those being, I've seen them on eBay and Marketplace for $350. So like you can get something used for $350. To be honest with you, that's like, even with 3 batteries, I think that's just such a hard sell. And this is a free product that I got. I appreciate companies wanting to send me something. I love, when companies do that, but like, it is so hard for me to just sit down and say, oh yeah, I am going to recommend this product just because they sent it to me for free. I'm sorry, I can't. This is just, I don't really think there's any good positives except for the fact that maybe it has some obstacle, some person tracking maybe. But even then, the quality of the video is just so poor, and there is no obstacle sensing on this, so it's literally just blind tracking you. So it's not like you're getting any real like usable obstacle tracking that you would compared to a DJI Mini 2. So there's just something to consider, is do you really need the obstacle avoidance? And then there's the whole deal with, like, you could probably get another drone. The Tel Nanos are flying really. So as you can see, I'm just trying to fly through these trees and it's just like bouncing all over the place. That's the other thing. It's so difficult to fly through even relatively large areas. It's just difficult. I've had some great drone companies send me some relatively cheap drones, about maybe $300. Holy Stone was a good example. And I had some very vocal complaints about how they use the optical flow in a $300 drone. But this one has no optical flow. And I know it looks like I haven't flown it. I have. I'm just trying to keep the stuff on it. But this has no optical flow, and I find that the GPS is quite simply unreliable. You have flying the drone, it's flying around, all that stuff, and the GPS is unreliable. It takes, like, if I launch it from outside on my driveway, it might take 30 minutes to get a signal, if that. It's just completely unusable as it is with the GPS. So an optical flow sensor would be great, except it doesn't have one. Also, I don't know if they would implement it properly. The range and all that stuff is great. I flew it out like far. I was fine. I was actually surprised that it worked really well, so no issues with range. It's just the problem is, especially GPS, getting a GPS lock is one. I mean, once you have a GPS lock, it's pretty good. I mean, you have to fly in an open area though, and no under the trees, nothing like that, in comparison to other drones that we've used and reviewed on this channel. Also, another interesting thing is that I've noticed a lot of, like, how do I say this? This drone likes to bob a lot. That means, like, when you lay off the throttle, it will sink, it will move around, and regardless of whether or not it's connected to the GPS, it doesn't seem to be tuned properly is the best way to describe it. So when you're, like, flying forward and, you lay off the throttle, it, normally, especially when you fly in full manual, you get familiar with the idea that, when you're tilted forward, you have to apply more thrust to keep at the same altitude. And when you lay off the throttle, then all of a sudden the thrust should decrease to maintain the same altitude. Something that we commonly see in these, FPV manual drones. And ultimately, this is doing a lot of those things simplified for you. Except I've noticed a lot of times when I lay off the throttle, the drone likes to come up a little bit, which basically means that there's not some tuning. There's some tuning issues there. Also, it likes to kind of go down a little bit and sink. Also, trying to land this drone is atrocious in comparison to drones with optical flow. Quite simply, the optical flow would have been a great feature to have here because then it would be able to land properly. Also, return to home was flat out unreliable. I had the return to home set like in the middle of a field and it ended up arguably could have been coming over me, but instead of landing and returning to home where it took off, it returns home for where the controller is, or at least that was my experience, and it was off from where it was supposed to be. In addition, I did check out the tracking, and obviously having no sensors on here, this is a dumb tracking, so it's pretty much just going to follow GPS location. You have an option for the controller or an optical option. I wasn't actually able to get the optical option to work, but I did get the GPS following to work, and this was very slow to update. I found it impractical, especially like I could basically run and touch the drone before the drone would realize that this controller is moved. So it just struck me as this being very slow, and impractical almost. Also, when you ran up to it, the drone would like turn, it would do all kind of crazy things to get away from you, and it would make the video unusable. So if you're going fast and you're doing a lot of sporadic movements, this is the follow feature is completely useless. So in conclusion, what do I have to say here? Sadly, I don't really have many nice things to say. I had the previous version of this, at least the SJRC version of this previously. It's the same drone. Honestly, for whatever $400 some, it's difficult, especially with like the video quality having a lot of the same issues of jittery, also having a lot of issues with like the bowed video. So I again appreciate companies sending me stuff, but where this stacks up to competition that's lower priced is a lot is quite difficult, especially because this drone is competing with Mavic Minis and Mini SE drones from DJI, and it's hard to make a compelling argument for this compared to those. I mean, yes, it's larger, but it has no optical flow. It's missing a lot of the features, and especially with, I mean, for this being what is a $450 drone, if you wanted to buy this, I mean, you're getting into Mavic 2 range, or Mavic Mini 2 range. Heck, even Autel starts selling their Autel Nano with optical avoidance, three-way optical avoidance at like $650. So, and that's got a substantially larger, nicer camera. I mean, I think that maybe a $200 drone, this would be good. And I mean, I appreciate all of the USB-C upgrades and stuff, but it's not well tuned in my experiences, and the travel and the follow home and all the features that I like to use on the nicer high-end drones, I understand are not applicable, and this is not DJI and they can't produce the same level of stuff. But it's a drastically different flight experience from the minis, and it's not a good one. And I think this, especially the biggest thing, is just you can't fly at some areas that you can fly regular drones in. I really think the upgrades that I would recommend is optical flow, getting a better kind of system, the firmware on here, which you can't even upgrade, which is why I can't even recommend this drone, honestly, is that the firmware issues can never be fixed, at least for the current drones, and there's no way, even if they put a firmware upgrade, there's no way that you can actually get a firmware upgrade, at least that I'm aware of. Or at least I haven't seen any, sorry, I should rephrase that. I have not seen any firmware upgrades, and a lot of times with these drones, they don't really, especially when you have like Wi-Fi connection, they don't really have firmware upgrades compared to like DJI, Autel, Skydio, all these major companies. And I understand this is a cheaper drone, but even like the minis still get firmware upgrades from DJI. So it just makes this a lot more of a difficult sell when the firmware has problems, at least with the going up and down, and it's not fun. It's difficult to land. You're always, it's like you move it and it just doesn't follow well, especially when it gets close to the ground. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day, and see you next time in the next review.